Welcome to the Mies Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Sharkey, the founder and CEO of Mies, the culinary operating system for food professionals. On the show, I'll be interviewing world-class entrepreneurs in the food space that are shifting the paradigm of how we innovate and operate in our industry. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Yo, they say art mirrors life with every stroke of the pencil. I'm giving you folks a glimpse into my experiences.
My guest today knows a whole heck of a lot about wine and mezcal, and well, pretty much any boozy beverage that you can think of. Matt Conway is an old friend, and he's the owner, operator, and sommelier of Tippling House in Charleston, South Carolina, along with his lovely wife, Carissa Hernandez. Matt and I met almost 2 decades ago working for Chef Gray Kunz, where Matt became, I believe, the youngest beverage director in the city. He then went on to work at Restaurant Marc Forgione, first as the GM and beverage director, and eventually as a partner at the restaurant, working there for over 14 years. In between that time, he also spent some time at the cellars at Taillevent in Paris. Matt won 30 under 30 from Zagat and other awards like Rising Star Sommelier from Star Chefs. And Matt just loves wine and loves the whole community and world of beverage. And anytime you talk to him, you just hear it in his voice, the passion and the travels that he's done to learn and to grow as a beverage professional. And I just love talking to him about it. During the pandemic, Matt spent some time in Charleston to get away from the city and eventually ended up loving it so much. He has some family down there that he ended up moving there with his wife and open up his dream spot, enter Tippling House. So we talk a lot about the differences between working in New York and smaller cities like Charleston, what it's like to leave New York as an expat. We talk about the food culture in Charleston, and of course we dig a lot into wine and booze and what makes a great sommelier. I enjoyed the conversation. I always love catching up with Matt, and I hope you do as well. Welcome to the Mies Podcast. I don't think I've seen you in person in a long time, but this is an excuse to just get a call with you.
I love it.
So we're going to talk about your background, your past, and I think I wanted to kind of center a lot of this around Charleston, if that's cool, because you migrated from New York to Charleston. For the people that aren't listening, there's been a lot of chefs. You're the first beverage person here. So maybe a little bit about your background and how you got where you got.
Well, I moved to New York in the early 2000s from California to pursue a career as a sommelier, and landed in New York and went to the American Sommelier Association and took classes in viticulture, vinification, and blind tasting. And then I was working as a server at the time. And then I landed my first gig as a sommelier at Café Gray, which was a Gray Kunz restaurant at the Time Warner Center on the 3rd floor, just below Per Se. Gray was a legendary chef, and I just got hired as a floor sommelier working under the beverage director. I gave notice at my job, went to California for a vacation before I started the new job. And when I showed up for my first day on the floor, they said, "We let your boss go. Here's the keys to the Euro cows. We have 373 covers on the books. Good luck."
Was Alex the boss?
The person who told me that was Gil, I believe. Gil Rubenstein, maybe.
Why did you get into beverage? Why did you want to be a sommelier?
I always worked in restaurants my whole life. My mother ran restaurants, and I started most of my work in the back of the house. And then I realized it was less.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
You were in the kitchen? I had no idea.
Yeah, I did all types of, short order cooks and then garde manger for nice restaurants. And I mean, they were working me really hard, long hours. It didn't make a lot of money. And, look at this handsome face. You got to put what God gave you to work. So I was like, it's so much easier on your quality of life to work in the front of the house, more money, less hours. But I didn't want to be a server. And then I moved to San Diego, and I had an experience with a wine distributor who tasted me on several wines with lemon segments, bar olives, guanciale, and tasting the salt, the fat, and the acid with different wines. And I was mesmerized by how everything played off each other. And I just decided that I had to get into wine. I thought it was a little bit sexier than being a server, clearly much easier than grinding away behind the stove. And then I just started doing exercises, and it's just a rabbit hole from there. And I realized if I want to get where I need to go, I need to move to New York. So I found the American Sommelier Association and moved.
Do you remember what those wines were that you tasted with the lemon
I
segments?
do
and olives
remember
and the
one of
guanciale?
them was a wine I still work with today and cherish, Mas de Domas Gassac from the Rhône Valley in Languedoc in south of France. And it's a very eclectic blend of different grapes. It's a white wine, but I always call it like a chameleon wine. If you're having something acidic, it gets very rich. If you're eating something rich, it gets very acidic. It's a very unique wine. And that was one of the wines that went well with all three components, which is really rare. But I'll tell you, when I set out on any of this, the idea of being able to work for a chef as well known as Gray Kunz was never even in my wildest dreams. It just kind of happened, meaning moving to New York and getting the first job and the second job. And then my teacher at the ASA said, oh, there's an opening at Café Gray. I'd never heard of Gray Kunz. And then looking at his resume, I was like, I can't work for this guy. This is crazy. So when they handed me the keys and said, there's almost 400 people on the books and ER, and here's the keys and there's no help. And then I stepped out onto the floor, and the captains at Café Gray are, lifelong servers that had cut their teeth at Le Bernardin and, all the most famous restaurants. And you throw a 24-year-old child onto the floor with sharks, is what I would call, sharpening their teeth for 3 decades on the floor of the finest restaurants in Manhattan. And then all of a sudden I'm helping them with their wine service. It was, I don't know. I've described it as like just learning how to walk on nails by somebody just throwing you on nails, figuring out how to get off, because there was no smooth way to avoid the, I don't know, I wouldn't call it abuse at all. They were great to me in many ways, but they certainly weren't going to let me get off easy or slide by any stretch. But I'm a good salesperson, and I think whether they liked me or wanted to accept me early on, they realized that I was actually good at making the money, selling high-end wine and building the list from what it was. And so that was the beginning of my sommelier career.
I remember that vividly, obviously, because we worked together there. One of the other impressive things I found when you started working there is, you were really young and not nearly as experienced, and took a lot of shit, not just from, I don't know exactly how much they busted your chops in the front of house, but I know in the kitchen there was a lot of it. But you took it so well. You would get hammered, and just straight face, no problem. On it, or yep, okay, thank you, and walk away and absorb it however you absorbed it, and go back to the craziness of the dining room. I have to imagine like stepping into a situation where you're the youngest, you're not nearly as experienced as others, but you have all this responsibility, and you have people that are just sort of probably just gunning at you because clearly they're thinking, why is this kid doing this, right? Why is this kid who is younger than us, less experienced than us, running a part of this restaurant? I have to imagine that had an impact on the way you traverse the rest of your career, not just in beverage, but in the restaurants in general.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, looking back on that time, I didn't really have time to feel emotions. I had so much stuff to do in such little time. I used to come in early in the morning to just start getting stuff done and leave late at night every day. And everybody else in that restaurant was doing the same thing. So I didn't feel like I didn't have it bad. I felt like I needed to catch up. And that's something that was definitely a theme of my career, watching somebody that's working either above me or alongside of me, working as hard or harder than me. And that always has encouraged me to do more, be better, spend more time, invest more. And the mentality of like giving it to me harder, I was new. I deserved it. I needed to be pushed at that point in my career. So I never tried to take anything personally. I'd also worked for Mr. Marshall, Chef Marshall at Aqua Grill, and he was as hard as you could ever be on anybody ever. So I had come from a situation where being picked on or called names or whatever was certainly not new to me. And when you're on the floor, you can't show, especially it was an open dining room for those who don't know Café Gray. Everybody could see you from every seat in the restaurant. There was no hiding, and you couldn't wear it on your face. You had to just push through. But the one thing about that particular experience wasn't necessarily like the team aspect of what I learned. But everybody in the restaurant and wine community, they wanted to be a part of what Gray was doing. He was a living legend, and, people wanted their wine there. People wanted to eat there. People wanted to be associated with it. And so the thing that it really did for me most was, until I left New York, almost every single one of my wine relationships was started at Café Gray. I got to work with the best wine sales reps and the best, brightest minds in the industry. If I were at another restaurant, they wouldn't have had time for me, but they had time for me because I was working for Gray Kunz. I've never forgot that or taken it for granted, because that paid huge payoff in my career to be able to have relationships with the best at every company. And that was just because I was working for that guy and no other reason. It had nothing to do with me. And so that's something that opened a lot of doors for me and created a lot of opportunity once I left that company, and made my career much easier, and certainly probably allowed me to skip a few steps that maybe other sommeliers at the time had to take in their career to pay their dues or, so on and so forth, to start to get to work with the best. And I've always been grateful for that.
How does that work if you don't have that opportunity and that doesn't sort of come to you early in your career as a sommelier or in the beverage world? What is that sort of path? You just need to sort of work your way up in a number of the right places that will help get you those relationships? Are there relationships you make outside of the restaurant?
Sure. I think Risto Zizovsky, one of my best friends, we went to wine school together at the same time. And when I got hired at Café Gray, he got hired at Jean Georges, and he took much more traditional path of starting as a cellar rat, maybe one shift, lunch shift on the floor. And then when people got promoted or moved on, he would get a promotion slow by slow. And a year in, I was running a multi-million-dollar beverage program at Café Gray, and he was just getting his first 3 nights on the floor. And it probably took us 5 years for us to meet up and have our careers be much more parallel. I kind of took the shortcut method, not by choice, just by the way things, the cards were dealt, and he took a little bit more of the traditional small promotion type situation. So there's obviously many ways to skin a cat, but yeah, his path was going to tastings and working the slow route of climbing the ladder and, putting yourself in the best position for every promotion that was available. And he eventually, became the beverage director and won awards, everything you could ever dream of for Jean Georges. Different paths.
Yeah. Now that things have sort of converged, when you look back, if you're talking to somebody who wants to get into the world of wine and beverage today, do you think you would have any sort of different advice given that convergence, given you sort of had this one opportunity, Riso had a different one? Do you feel like you guys are in similar wavelengths of how you think about running a beverage program? Meaning, do you think that if you could do it all over, that path of sort of slowly sort of working your way up is more beneficial, the same? Or is it just that if you happen to have the opportunity?
I definitely think take the opportunity that's in front of you, which is what I did. However, so much has changed. The idea of what a sommelier is in the United States from 20 years ago to today. It was an almost unknown profession then, and now, whether they're true sommeliers or just sommeliers in name, restaurants have wine dedicated staff. A lot of the old school heroes are long retired. So it's a little bit of a different game, but I do always recommend anybody looking to get into the industry to find someone that they admire or a group of beverage people that they admire and apply to work for them. And yeah, start with whatever job they'll give you and be there to do inventory on the weekends and do the small things that make a beverage director's life easier. Always being on call, being available if somebody calls out sick, working weekends and holidays and all of the things. And that's the best way to learn, to have a mentor, somebody that can teach you certain things. And while I didn't work directly under someone at Café Gray or really ever in my career outside of my time in France, I still relied heavily on those that had kind of come before me for advice, all types of interesting communication with people to try to learn as much as I could outside of Café Gray and have that mentorship available when I got to a tough place and I didn't know how to handle something. So I was looking for a promotion and I wasn't sure how to pitch it to my boss. So I still sought that out, even when I didn't have someone I was directly under. So I highly recommend People always say, should you do the MS or not? For me, it's all about mentorship. Whatever program or path you choose, having somebody that's well vetted, that's done great work that you're proud of and you think, you would want to emulate. Again, it doesn't always work out that you get to work for that person, but to find somebody that checks as many of those boxes as possible and getting an opportunity to work alongside of them is always the best route, in my opinion.
What's the primary skill set that makes a great sommelier outside of everything sort of operationally, helping the team, supporting, running service, things, that kind of thing? You said going to MS, to become a master sommelier. What defines quantitatively, like this is what it means to be a great sommelier?
That's a really good question that I don't get often asked. And my opinion is I don't know if you've ever heard of like a 3-tool athlete. There's lots of athletes that are really, really good at a couple things, but it's the third tool that really sets certain people apart. And I think sommeliers are very similar. Lots of people are very good on the floor and lots of people are very good with numbers.
When you say numbers, you mean just the cost of a beverage menu and things like that?
Buying, selling, costing out the wines, making the restaurant profitable, running a good P&L, like those types of behind the scenes things, buying power, getting better deals, all of those things. And then there's people who are really good on the floor. And oftentimes, not often, but enough, those things cross where there's somebody who's really good at numbers and also really good on the floor. But I think the third tool for a sommelier is somebody who's good with people. You can perform well on the floor and be very bad with people. It's acting in many ways. You can put on your costume and go out on the floor and razzle dazzle people and sell them wine. But oftentimes that person is the most disliked amongst their own team or, maybe even within the distribution community in their town. I think the best sommeliers are good at floor work and behind the scenes numbers, but also the third tool would be building relationships with your team at your restaurant, your chef, but also your best clients, getting people to return on your behalf, wanting to spend their money in your seats, not necessarily done at tableside, but building relationships where you may communicate via email or text outside of the dining room with regulars that want to come host a dinner with you or do things. And then also on the distribution side, having really strong relationships and being very easy to communicate with and do business with on the side of like how you source the wines, and those relationships are as important to setting your beverage program apart from others as anything a sommelier does. Just yesterday here at the wine bar, I got a shipment of wine from a friend of mine that I've known. I met at Café Gray all those years ago, and she owns her own small import distribution company, and it's a very specialized business. And I would never have access to those wines. They would never be in this market here if it weren't for that relationship that I've worked on for almost 20 years now, which allows us to have special wines that other people don't have, or I can get larger quantities. So it's a 3-tier system: floor work, numbers, and then being relatable to a wide audience. And I think a lot of sommeliers are disliked amongst their own team inside their own restaurant because it seems like they've got the easy job. They're same reasons I got picked on at Café Gray. You wear the nice suit, you look, whatever. Like people, it's an easy target on your back. But I think the people who have the ability to earn the respect of their team, willing to bust the tables, willing to seat guests or whatever it takes to get through service and earn the respect of their team, I think those are the best sommeliers. And you can feel it when you walk into a dining room where the team around a sommelier wants to support that sommelier or not. And many people might not notice that, but when I walk into a restaurant, I can feel almost immediately whether that sommelier has the support of their team or does not. And when they have it, I think the opportunity for some of the best dining experiences possible.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like there's like, it's analogous to what when a cook walks in a kitchen, or if you walk into a kitchen as a chef, in 5 minutes, you can tell whether or not that cook is a good cook, irrespective of what they're cooking. Just the way that they walk, the way that they move in their station sounds very similar.
How they interact with the cooks around them.
Exactly. How they interact. Are they mindful of like what another cook is doing? Are they of space? So that all makes a ton of sense as it relates to hospitality. Maybe getting a little bit more sort of granular with wine, because obviously a sommelier is dealing with wine. How do you just sort of distinguish yourself as a great sommelier as it relates to building a wine list? Obviously, it sounds like some of it is those relationships give you access to different wines that you might not be able to get otherwise, and then someone can go to a restaurant and have a wine that they wouldn't be able to get somewhere else. But you're also sort of architecting this wine menu, and you're also sort of prescribing what someone should drink with the food that they have, and just obviously creating that around the food that's being created as well. And in the restaurant, there's knowledge, right? I think there's obviously just sort of a knowledge base. You know, in a perfect world, let's just say that I'm an AI and I know every single piece of information from every single wine in the world, and I know every single aspect of what that wine should taste like or what the terroir that it came from. How do you sort of like deploy that information into being an incredible sommelier? And you will talk about it, but you travel a lot around France and sort of learn and meet all these winemakers. And let's just say that every sommelier did that, and every sommelier knew the same amount of information about wine. How do you distinguish yourself as, you know, or do you? Or is that something that you actually think about, of distinguishing yourself from other sommeliers and how you build a wine list or think about, you know, prescribing what someone should drink when they're in a restaurant?
I really think that the first thing about that is just the understanding that nobody cares. Right? I spend all the time. Really, there's no two ways about it. You spend all this time traveling all the world and studying soil types, not to speak about that table side. And the sommeliers that do that learn quickly or over time for the slower ones that's not why people are coming to a restaurant. If you want to know about the soil type of region in which you're ordering the bottle of wine, you're in a wine class, right? You're going to sign up for a nerdy, geeky specified class. If you sit down in a dining room, you don't give a shit what soil type is in, you know, it's not how that works. I find that connecting the story of the vigneron and what they're about is what is really important. So for instance, and I tell this story fairly frequently at Forge, where I was after Café Gray, Restaurant Marc Forgione, I had a large list of Chave Hermitage, which is a very expensive wine. And I had wines going back to the 70s at one point. And let's just say they're all $1,000 a bottle, roughly. If somebody came in and was interested in those wines and wasn't familiar with Chave Hermitage, which is rare, but it did happen, I was more likely to sell a bottle of Chave Hermitage because of how cute their little brown lab Marley is. People connect with a small, cute dog, and most people are dog lovers. So stories like that, I think, are really important to connecting people. Is it a female vigneron? What type of food did they serve you while you were there? Things that people can actually connect with and feel comfortable with. And traveling helps you fill your arsenal of stories that you can then deploy. I'm way more likely to talk about somebody's dog than the type of soil the grapes are grown in at a table. So having those stories to kind of connect that big gap between the grower and the final consumer is what I think being a great sommelier is. How you distinguish a difference between yourself. Everybody more or less has the same access to the same wines, pretty much. The two things that I think really set people aside is wine lists that have something for everybody. I was recently at a New York restaurant with a sommelier who'd worked under me at one point in time, and all of the wines were so expensive. It was a great wine list, but there was nothing there for people who were on a budget, servers, people who are everyday folk. Like, not everybody can spend $100 on a bottle of wine at lunch. And that I've seen more and more of. It's so hard to buy wines that are great at $50 on a wine listing, because that means you're buying it for $10 to $15 a bottle, and there's just not that much great wine out there. So if you can work to find those wines, put them on your list, that always distinguishes yourself. And the sommeliers that have done that well in their career over time have always, always excelled. Because if you can go to a restaurant, sit down and spend $60 and get a bottle of wine that's good as the wines that are $120, because that sommelier did the work to go to the tasting and taste through a bunch of bad wine to find the gem, that's special. And then, the other part of that is, finding a specialty. And what I learned early on, it's too hard to know the whole world of wine and stay on top of it. So I became a Northern Rhône person because it's where my passion lies. And, Pascaline is known for the Loire and Chenin, and, the Rajat and Rajis of the world are like Burgundy people. Like, you kind of find your niche, and then people start to come to you because you have an expertise in a more specific genre of wine, and that's really starts to set you apart. I literally get anywhere from 3 to 8 communications a week from people around the world, but usually the country, that have questions for me about the Rhone. What bottle should I choose? Do you think this is a good vintage to cellar? I'm looking for Crozes Hermitage and I want to buy something else besides Graillot. What do you recommend? I want to go visit. Can you set me up with this producer? And so that's been a really interesting way for me to distinguish myself among my peers, is having an expertise in an area that other people don't have the time or bandwidth to be experts in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. When I was like thinking about this conversation we were going to have, we're sort of in this, me and my world, there's a lot more, in addition to food, there's a lot of technology in my world now. And everybody talks about how AI is changing and how it's going to replace everything. And I think actually a sommelier is one of the best examples of how humans are still going to be deeply needed for many things, because I thought about this question about what makes because I've known you for many, many years, and Hristo and things like that. And I think about like what makes them great. And it seems like empathy is really, really important, to your point of like, yeah, you need to have more than just the wines that like you geek out on. You have to have the ones that like the person that's coming here that doesn't want to spend $100, but still wants a really great wine. And you have to go and find that. And you have to be empathetic to like their needs as well as the wine aficionado. And, just storytelling is probably like the one thing that you do because you love this so much and no other reason why. Like, it's different, I think, from being a great salesman. A great salesman is someone who can just, eloquently explain to somebody why something is good. But, I think sommeliers are one of these really interesting professions where it's not unlike, and a lot of servers do, love what they do, but you love a very specific thing and you talk about it and you learn about it. And then you get to go and help people like learn about it. And to your point, no one really cares about sort of the pH in the soil and why the sun comes here and things like that. If you can sort of put them in that place and you can sort of take them to a place that they aren't today and have them feel like they know a little bit about the person that made this wine and they know a little about the family and about the history. That's always the wine that I walk away. I'm in a restaurant and I take a picture of the bottle. It's not because it was so delicious. It's because like, oh my God, that's such a cool fucking story. And that's not something that, you can sort of teach. You have to really love it to tell a story like that. You have to have gone there and met with that person and, walked the fields and really loved that thing. And that's what I think I love most about sort of the world of being a sommelier, is that you guys are sort of on this island of, you're not at a restaurant just because you love the food and you want to talk about the food and you love the people. Obviously, all those things are true, but you also have this deep passion for something outside of all of that you get to sort of learn more about and teach everybody about. And I think that for me is what comes through right away with the sommelier when they walk the table and you could just tell they love this thing way more than you, and they're making you excited about it because they just want you to enjoy this thing that they enjoy so much.
Absolutely. And I think another analogy that I would use on a regular basis, could you imagine watching a Bob Ross episode on PBS if he wasn't such a good storyteller? You'd just be watching somebody doing an oil painting and you'd literally be like, this is the most boring thing I've ever seen in my entire life. Great. But then he gets into telling you the happy little trees here in that corner. And he walks you through and tells you the story about, this imaginative side of like, oh, we're going to break a little duck over here on the pond. And anybody who's ever watched Bob Ross, like you're 10 minutes in and the guy's got you hooked fully. You're just like, yeah, give me some more happy trees, Bob. Like you buy in fully because he's presenting it in a way that's just, it's magical technically to me. And I think that's really everybody can serve a bottle of wine, pull the cork, go, can you pour it out? But if you can manage to Bob Ross that bottle while you're pouring it, that's what the art of sommelier is all about, is Bob Rossing a bottle.
This podcast is brought to you by Mies, the culinary operating system for food professionals. As a chef and restaurant owner for the past 20 years, I was frustrated that the only technology that we had in the kitchen was financial or inventory software. Those are important, but they don't address the actual process of cooking, training, collaboration, and consistent execution. So I decided if it didn't exist, I'd do my best to get it built, so the current and next generation of culinary pros have a digital tool dedicated to their craft. If you're a chef, mixologist, operator, or generally if you manage recipes intended for professional kitchens, Mies is built just for you. Organize, share, prep, and scale your recipes like never before, and get laser-accurate food costs and nutrition analysis faster than you could imagine. Learn more at www.getme's.com. Outside of the wine, and then we're going to move on from this. I think the other skill set that's probably not isolated to sommeliers, but just in the front of house in general as a chef, like the ability to, we were talking about before about, you being straight faced when someone's coming at you really hard in the kitchen. I'm sure the same thing happens with customers, where you're talking to them about a wine and they're just, maybe they're drunk, maybe they're rude, maybe, like that happens sometimes. And the ability to just let all of that sort of like pass by you and just continue finishing this, talking about the thing that you're talking about to get them to place an order. That's a skill set, I think, too, of just being able to sort of process and not sort of react to all of the things that you're talking to so many different people on any given night. And everybody has a different personality, a different attitude. Some are happy, some are not happy, some are unhappy, and there's nothing that you can do about it. I feel like that's probably a skill set you have to sort of build up over time as well.
There's no book for that. And to be honest with you, I'm never tableside talking to somebody that's not wanting to listen because I can read the table. If you're not there to engage, I pull the cork and pour, like knowing when to not
Just slowly backing up.
Talk to a table is as important as knowing what to say to people who want to know. And, that's something no book or there's no cheat sheet or shortcut for that. And I work with my sommeliers here in Charleston, but, in my career in New York all the time about body language, posture, the way that people are like behaving, who to try to sell the big bottle to, when it's best to just forget that, even if you think the sale is possible, because you want people to be as happy as possible. So reading guests and what they want to get out of the experience is important as anything in the front of the house, but particularly when you're dealing with something that could turn a normal night into a very expensive night. There's no other, with the exception of maybe like truffle sales in fall, there's really no other opportunity to take a 4-top from $600 to $2,000 outside of the wine department. So sometimes people want to spend that money and sometimes they don't, and you can talk them into that. And that might be the worst thing you could possibly do, because once you set the bar here that they're spending that money, the expectations become so hard to meet that sometimes it's better to just shoot for something that's much more comfortable for them and just have everybody be happy. And that takes time to learn.
Yeah, it's definitely a skill set. And I think there's obviously a lot of empathy in that. Okay. Well, so now we know a little bit more about how to be a great sommelier. We talked about your time at Café Gray with Kunz. Obviously, you then went on to Forgione for a long time and then Charleston. So maybe a little bit about like some takeaways from Forgione and why you ended up moving to Charleston.
When I left Gray, I was fortunate enough to meet a young Marc Forgione and take the job to open the flagship restaurant in Tribeca with, hoping to kill that scenario and growth. And it was a rocky road just with the financial crisis and all of the hardships that we faced early on in a small restaurant without big backers. So the amount of lessons that I learned through that process, specifically the first 3 or 4 years of falling deep in debt, crawling your way out and keeping your head up when times are tough and sticking to what you believe in, like all of those things were extremely valuable lessons. And like kind of as I mentioned at Café Gray, a lot of people have opinions about Marc Forgione. The dude works as hard as anybody I've ever met. And so early on, his name was on the door. Having somebody that worked harder than you, no matter how many hours you put in, always encouraged me to show up early and stay late. And that always teaches me now as a business owner myself, lead by example. If you're at the beach all the time sipping Mai Tais, then your staff might be pretty lazy. If they're worried you're going to be there before them, chances are they're going to beat you there and, be halfway through their day's work by the time you arrive. The idea of like sticking to your beliefs and persevering through tough times is definitely probably my biggest takeaway from my time at Forge, just because we went through a lot of hard times early on. Once we got to where we were on comfortable ground, just building and perfecting as great of a wine list as you could possibly do. I mentioned earlier, I had a vertical shop going back to the 70s, like things I dreamed of as a sommelier, and I wasn't doing it for a big restaurateur that already had a big list and a huge budget. I literally built it from nothing. And there was a point in time where we were breaking cases of wine by the glass. So strapped for cash. And then to be able to build a huge vertical of Allemande and Chave and some of the wines that I love the most that are very hard to get and rare, was an experience that I had never had before, no matter what I'd done. So that was cool and rewarding and led me to some really good times, towards the end of the 14 years that I was at Forge, where we were busy and the food is great and the service was top notch in a very unpretentious way. And the team had been there for a long period of time. So it's also nice after working so hard for so long to kind of have built something that, didn't take the really grueling work that it did early on. So seeing that through and kind of reaping the benefits of that hard work was extremely rewarding. And then the pandemic hit and my wife and I moved to Charleston temporarily because my family was here. They'd relocated down here about 6 years before the pandemic. And we lived in a studio apartment in Battery Park City, and the weather was cold and we were looking at the prospect of being locked indoors for a long time. So we just rented a car and drove south for a week. I literally didn't bring a suitcase. I've got a closet full of big suitcases for international travel, and I didn't even pull one out. I put a pair of shorts, a pair of jeans, and some underwear, grabbed my 2 dogs, and we threw it in the car. I had flip-flops. I don't even know if I brought shoes, to be honest. And so nobody knew what was going to happen. A week turned into a month turned into 3 months. Our lease was up in New York. New York was still crazy. My wife had got a good job down here, so we decided to temporarily move our stuff out of there to here, and we rented a multi-style apartment and never went back.
It's crazy, man. It's crazy. It's a crazy way to get to Charleston. I'd love to just learn more about Charleston, especially because your perspective of spending so much time in New York. But I have one question for you. Just because now you're a business owner, right? You have a team, right? And I think about this a lot with my team. In the past, I might have some ownership in restaurants, but I don't run restaurants now. I run a tech company, but I'm the same as way, just working crazy hours, working long hours, just constantly sort of grinding to get better and improve. I think more lately about the negative impact that has on my team, because not everybody actually should work that way. And, there are some people that, we hire them for a job, but they're an expert in that field and they know what they need to get done. And it's not a measure of success isn't a number of hours that you put in. It's how much output, and what results you drive. And I'm curious how you think about that now in terms of how you help your staff understand how they should be navigating that, given you probably do work, a lot and work many hours, and your staff sees that. I know I've gotten feedback from my team of quote unquote, we feel like we should be working more because we see how much you're working. And I don't want that. I don't want them to feel like they need to be doing more just because I am. But I'm curious now, you have a business of your own. Has that changed for you at all?
I think they say when you do what you love, you don't work a day in your life. Unfortunately for me, there's a lot of stuff about my weekly duties that I don't love, so I work a lot. But it's a good question, and it's a conversation that you and I may have even had, and I had with many of my friends in New York that I, love and respect, like yourself, during the COVID era. And that was a big reason why I didn't return to New York. There had to be a better way, man. I watched so many of my friends and, peers just get absolutely the shit end of the stick during COVID. $100 million restaurants, companies that furloughed their executive management teams with a week and a half of healthcare and just left them out there on the sidelines. Unfathomable in any other industry. I think what COVID proved is that the restaurant industry views their workforce as disposable, frankly. And something I did I didn't see the real opportunity for change in New York City, not necessarily because I don't think owners want that, but because I don't think that it's really possible in the cutthroat world of rents and the cost of doing business in New York. It's impossible to give all of your staff healthcare in New York and still run a restaurant unless you're doing $70 appetizers, which isn't appetizing to anybody. So seeing that and having really dark conversations, you like that dad joke? Having those conversations and seeing a lack of a path to what I believed was necessary change after COVID. And I'll say it, it's unpopular and it doesn't get me friends. The restaurant business complains that there's no labor It's because we built a system that doesn't value the people that we need to do our jobs. And if you think it's greedy ownership, I can tell you by experience in New York City, in my restaurants, that it wasn't greedy ownership. It was just the cost of doing business. There may be greedy owners out there as well, but at the end of the day, regardless of the reason, is the restaurant structure, the way that things are structured, doesn't value the day-to-day hourly employee that you need to wash dishes, serve tables, and do everything else necessary. So when the shit hit the fan and they got the shit end of the stick, they said, fuck it. I don't know if I'm allowed to cuss on this, but they said, fuck it, I'm out of here. You know, we're going to go do something else. I can make equal or close to equal money doing something much less strenuous and have weekends off. And there's nobody to blame for that. But we are a brilliant community and have all of the possibility to change the system. And sadly, after COVID, some of the big players that have a lot of control to make huge progressive changes in our industry failed to do so. Disappointing. I think it's long-term, a really the number one complaint I hear about New York now is how expensive it is. Even just to go to a casual Mexican restaurant on the corner that serves chips and salsa and an enchilada. And, you know, it's $140 for two people to go to dinner. And that, to me, is a byproduct of us not learning the lesson during COVID. So what I wanted to do with my own space, put me out of business if it does, value everybody the way that I would want to be valued in their shoes. Healthcare, 2 days off every week. Nobody breaks 40 hours a week, ever. Giving people the quality of life that they deserve and hopefully still make a lot of money. So rare exceptions. I mean, we've been open a year and a half, and there's probably been, maybe 10 employees in a week that either went over 40 hours or had to work a 6-day a week. And they were always compensated for that as good or better than the average top shift that they had. So if they were required to work a 6-day, they'd get an extra day in their paycheck that was equal or better than their best day. So making people's work feel valued and making sure that they feel good about their healthcare situation. We're only open till 10 p.m. So a lot of people say, why don't you stay open later? It's a wine bar. I want my staff to be home in bed by midnight because that's comfortable for people. So, it wasn't easy as a new business to provide and offer those things to the team, but I think long-term it's paying dividends for the wine bar, but also just the health and happiness of there's only 5 of us. So having one person that's disgruntled or unhappy would be pretty big bummer. And I always have believed, going back to before I even moved to New York, you can't give great, true hospitality if your staff isn't happy. So you feed them good family meals, the number one thing that you need to do for your staff. Make sure that they're fed well and feel good at going into service. And so all of those things lead to what I believe is the core value that we offer at Tippling House, which is hospitality. You may not care about wine. You may be from town, out of town. It doesn't matter. If you do the core things that make people feel good, eye contact, a welcoming nature, the things that you would want as a guest in someone's home, which is what we try to do, then I think long-term that will pay off with more butts in the seats, which turns into more money for everybody. And then everybody still has the quality of life. So I figured if I didn't give those benefits to people right, and I waited until we were making money to offer those things, by the time I got there, there'd always be a reason why I didn't or couldn't extend that to them. So I just started out at the beginning and said, here you go, this is how it is. It was a risky gamble. And so far I'm knocking on wood. So far it's worked out quite nicely. And I think that that's something that I'm very proud of that we offer, that is just quality of life and covering the staff the way that you would want you and your family to be covered if they worked for someone else.
It's really brave, man. It is a risk, right? Like deciding not to be open certain hours. I don't know what the rent is, but obviously, there's so much pressure to just be able to even cover rent with these, with these businesses. And it's really commendable, man. The risk that you take. I actually love the premise though, because you started small. To your point, you have 5 people, right? So first of all, yeah, if one person is unhappy, 20% of your staff is unhappy. That's not good. But as you grow and your team grows with you because they can commit to this because they have health insurance, they have a job that they can stick with and probably grow with, you could decide, oh yeah, we'll be open later because someone decided they want to come work here and they are a night owl and they actually want to be here at night and they want to sleep during the day. And maybe at that point, you can add that on and take care of that person. And now you have 6 people but you're taking it slow and making sure you're taking care of your team I love that, man. Do you think you could accomplish the same thing with Tippling House if it was in the East Village of New York or a comparable neighborhood of New York City?
That's a really great question. I don't know the answer to that, mostly because I own my business outright. I don't have any partners, so I don't answer to anybody, which is great. I don't have to make joint decisions anymore. I don't know if that would be possible in New York. So if I had to take on an investor, that person might have different opinions than me about how we were going to go about the business. But if I opened a business that is going to close because I'm going to treat my staff the right way, that's my choice. I can run my business into the ground if I want. Whereas if I had an investor, they'd be like, no, you need to start doing this. You're out, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know because I don't have the money to open a business in the East Village.
Just assuming, let's just say $200 a square foot in rent and you got a 1,000 square foot space, right? In New York City, let's assume you did, open it on your own. You owned 100% of it, but that was the economics of the business. Do you think this would still work?
Yes, I think that there is a path forward for the restaurant business to change the way that we operate. And I think you saw a few people try, but the amount of people who didn't and the amount of big names, the bottom line is yes. Change and transformation, not only is it possible, but it was absolutely direly necessary coming out of COVID. And you didn't see it happen. I blame a lot of the big leaders that have always made change. If you go back and look at when Danny Meyer first went to gratuity included or whatever they called it for all of their restaurants, I remember how many other restaurants just fell in line, even though I thought it was a bad idea. How many people fell in line just because such a big industry leader like Danny Meyer did this. And so now we can do it too, or we should do it too, or whatever. And I'm not calling Danny out here at all. I'm just saying in general, if a big industry giant had said, no, this is how we're going to do things moving forward. We're going to enact this change for the benefit of our industry long term. I think more people would have been able to buy into that structure and it would have been a little bit easier of a transformation. But it's easy for me to say because I don't have all of the overhead that some of those people have. And just coming out of that really terrible time of COVID, like people were making decisions to keep the lights on and reopen doors and do things so that easy for me to sit here and pot shot from the side, but just trying to get the business open so that you're employing those people again was a huge goal of many people. But however we got there, we're back to a place where we can and should make those changes.
Yeah. I think 0 to 1 is probably the only way that it's possible. I mean, maybe it's possible to revert, but like once you have all of these people in place in your team and your hours are set the way they're set and the pay is set the way it's set, changing all of that, you kind of have to be reborn, right? Because you probably can run a restaurant with much less if they're taken care of. Maybe I don't actually know, that might not be true. But to start with the framework that you have after you've already been running in a different way, it's much more difficult. What's the biggest difference in being in Charleston from New York City? I don't even know how to ask that because there's probably a million different, socially, politically, from a restaurant standpoint, from a hospitality, from, community. But maybe you choose what direction to go. What's most different? Because it seems like, it's funny, I've known you since 2005, and I know you're not from New York, but I think of Matt, and I think of New Yorker. You are a New Yorker to me, but you love Charleston from everything that I hear. When I hear you talk about, people and, the life, what's different there from New York City and why'd you stay?
Well, I stayed because I'm actually stitzing a little bit sitting here in my air-conditioned apartment looking out the window. It was 88 degrees and sunny yesterday. It was almost 90 degrees in May. So I fish year-round in shorts and T-shirts. I hated the winter up north, and that alone is all of the reasons in the world. But now I live in a beautiful home rather than a studio apartment. I bike to work. I'm going to get on a bike in a few minutes and 5 minutes max to work. So my commute isn't on a subway with crazy people and all the wild stuff that I used to deal with. It's an easier life in many ways. And after almost 20 years in New York, now I'm 40, having the easier path on your day-to-day, existence is pretty awesome. I highly recommend it. I never thought I'd be able to do it. And now that I'm here, I can't believe I did that for so long. But the difference here is just we rely on a different type of clientele, a lot more out-of-towners and things like that, specifically in the fine wine world of, there's not that many people who live and exist in Charleston that want to spend or know a lot about small producers and things like that. There's a lot of people who would love to drink here, and we welcome them into the wine bar and have something for everybody and whomever wants a glass of wine. But we don't have the same pool of wine nerds, collectors, and most importantly, like even industry people in New York frequent other restaurants and go out and, want to learn and drink and be happy. Like there's a great restaurant community here, but a lot of them live in a suburb and drive, have kids. It just makes it a little less easy. Whereas most people in New York, subway, so they can bang back a bottle, no problem. Don't have to worry about driving. It's a little different with the makeup of who we're taking care of. And then it's a small town. So, everybody knows everybody. I can't go out on a night off and see several people that know. So you're kind of always, in public eye more here than you were in New York, where you just kind of I think more people knew and care about who I was as a sommelier in New York than down here. But I don't know. I ran into people in New York all the time, but it's just different. Like here, it feels like you're kind of always being viewed. You're always under a microscope in some ways. Not that anybody really cares what I'm doing. I just mean like you just see people more differently. And then, word travels quicker, whether it's getting a new wine on the wine list or something somebody did that other people didn't like. It's a little bit more like high school cliquey, but I think that's all small towns are. And I think New York's like that a lot as well. It's just more layered. There's more layers to get down to the surface of that. It's more complex because there's more people. People see each other less, so less opportunity to talk. It's just a small town. And there's great things about it too.
Yeah, I feel like in New York, there's just a lot more orbits, for instance, of word traveling, right? So word travels just as fast in New York, but you can be in a completely different orbit than another group of folks in the hospitality industry that you never hear from. And I think it's just because of the size of the city. What is the most surprising thing since you've been down there that you didn't realize when you moved to Charleston that's a part of the fabric of being there?
Probably the way that the wine business is different than in New York. Like I kind of thought naively that it was like, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere type of mentality. Not the case here as far as just, how distribution channels work, how suppliers supply, how wines are allocated and divvied up, just the base foundation of like thinking people would respect my career based on what I've done in the past coming here. And then you start here and like, everybody's like, who are you? Start from the ground up. So I respect that. I got no problem paying my dues and doing what needs to get done to do what I need to do to earn the respect, get the allocations and do whatever. But I was not expecting it to be so dramatically different from how New York does business. And a lot of that has to do with it, especially with the fine and rare world. It's a little bit of a newer world for them. When bringing those wines down here for that long, there's several of the companies I work with are fairly new. And again, maybe they don't have the experience of ever working with a supply company in New York. So they're kind of learning as they go. I can't be mad at that at all. I try to but it definitely was a surprise to me that it was not what I expected it to be as far as how things get done.
If you could start over again, today was your first day in Charleston and you just start building Tippling House, is there something significant that you would do different?
No, I don't think so. To be honest, little things along the way that we have adjusted, but I think that I don't think there's anything that I would have changed. I think that the foundation of what we started could have been done. Like there's different ways to handle how you open. And again, we opened very bare bones and like some people expected it to be more finished when we opened. And like, that wasn't how I wanted to go based on COVID and cash flow and like growing into a building.
Isn't it funny how none of that matters after you open, but before you open, every little corner of the restaurant, you're like, oh, that paint isn't right there, and that thing's chipped, and this light is a quarter inch this way, and this is not how it does. And then you open, and it's like, none of that shit matters.
So like, again, going back, if I had like all the cash in the bank to like do it a little bit more before we open, maybe, but again, all that's so insignificant that at the end of the day, like I'm really proud of what we do, what we put out, how we handle ourselves. And again, I'm a body stucky sommelier. First and foremost is hospitality, communication.
Did you say body stucky?
Bobby Stuckey from Frasca.
Got it. Bobby.
He's the king of hospitality. And sommeliers are literally waiters in a suit, right? I don't wear a suit. At the end of the day, like you have to be willing to bust a table and clean a toilet, whatever it takes. Like that's what I'm most proud of. And that's the core of who we are. And there's the paintings on the wall or lipstick on the pig, like I want to focus on the pork, and the pork is hospitality, and that's what we do. And I'm very proud of it. And so with that, I don't think there's anything that I would change at all.
Knowing you, that makes sense.
Maybe if I could be like 10 years younger, so my knees didn't hurt as much, that would be.
You don't look a day over 39, Matt. This was great. Anything else you want to share about you, Tippling House? Anything you think that would be helpful for the audience?
The only thing I would say is, we do the 5 days a week, and something that we've done here, we have a reserve list of, special fancy wines, a lot of them from my cellar when people want to come celebrate and spend more money. But everything on our daily list is under $100, and we print it and date it daily so that it's always fresh with a large by the glass selection, but we offer every bottle by the half.
Oh, that's cool.
Our markups are extremely low because we don't have the overhead of a chef we have a chef, but we don't have whole kitchen crew, management salaries that we have to support. So our prices are much closer to retail than they are normal restaurant markups. So you can come into the Tippling House and drink extremely hard to get rare bottles of wine in any market that are on our list all the time. And you can order a half bottle. So it's $30 for a half bottle, which is less than $15 a glass to drink Envinate and, Lafon, Bourgogne Blanc, and all of these producers that are hard to get elsewhere. And we make wine very accessible. We do it with a smile on our face, and we're happy to treat you like you're ordering in a really expensive bottle of wine if you're drinking something inexpensive by the glass. And I just hope that if somebody's listening to this at another market, that they swoop by and check us out when they're in town, because what we offer is unique in any market. And we're starting to build one of the greatest wine lists in the South, and we're very proud of it. There's no intimidation. You can come in and literally drink anything at any price point, and we are super happy to have you in. You don't have to chat about wine if you don't want to. And we're trying to put a hospitality first business out there. And a year and a half in, we're really starting to see that work. And I just invite more people to come check us out.
It's amazing, man. Well, I can't.
That's the shameless plug.
That's what I hear, man. Well, I mean, I can only imagine it's incredible knowing you, and you're just how much you love this industry and how much I've seen you devote to it over the last 15 years. So grateful to have seen you go through all this and finally open something like this in Charleston. And I can't wait to get there. I will take some medicine so that I can actually drink a little bit, and hopefully we get down there soon. So thanks, man.
Cool. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for tuning into the Mies podcast. The music from the show is a remix of the song Art Mirror by an old friend, hip-hop artist Fresh Daily. For show notes and more, visit getmees.com/podcast. That's GETMEEZ.com/podcast. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love it if you can share it with your fellow entrepreneurs and culinary pros, and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Keep innovating, don't settle, make today a little better than yesterday, and remember, it's impossible for us to learn what we think we already know. See you next time.